In a politically fractured town like Washington, D.C., you'd think a plan supported by President Obama and sworn Republican political enemies, including John McCain and Marco Rubio, would be sure to succeed. But there are no guarantees. Can the right of the Republican Party be persuaded to back comprehensive immigration reform? You're watching Inside Story Americas. Hello, I'm Kimberly Halkett. Immigration and the status of the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants currently in the United States has proved to be one of the most divisive issues in American politics. Previous attempts to reform the system have failed amid rancor in Washington, but this week there's new hope comprehensive reform could be passed by the end of the year. Yesterday, a bipartisan group of senators unveiled a far-reaching legislation that could provide a path to citizenship. Those arguing for reform were given hope by the presence of Republican senior Senator John McCain and also Marco Rubio, an early favorite for the Republican presidential nod in 2016. But there are obstacles. President Obama has come out in favor of the thrust of the plan. The key battles are to come when the bill comes up for debate in Congress. In particular, more right-leaning Republican congressmen are wary of alienating many Republican voters who are hostile to reform, arguing it amounts to amnesty. They seem to pay little heed to the arguments of Republican grandees who argue the party needs to win Latino support to stand any chance of regaining the White House. Let's have a listen to what President Obama had to say.
I'm here today because the time has come for common sense, comprehensive immigration reform. The time is now. Now's the time. I'm here because most Americans agree that it's time to fix a system that's been broken for way too long. I'm here because business leaders, faith leaders, labor leaders, law enforcement, and leaders from both parties are coming together to say now is the time to find a better way to welcome the striving, hopeful immigrants who still see America as the land of opportunity. Now's the time to do this so we can strengthen our economy and strengthen our country's future.
Well, I spoke to Jonathan Perez. He is the founder of the Immigrant Youth Coalition, and he's an undocumented immigrant originally from Colombia. I asked him what it's like to live in the United States without citizenship rights.
I think when you're an undocumented immigrant, especially here in the United States, I think the biggest obstacle is the fear that you face. One, you're afraid of law enforcement, you're afraid of driving. Like I still have fears of getting pulled over, and I'm constantly looking for police and see where they are. And I try to stay away from, cops. And so I think the fear is a big part of it, like the fear of not knowing if your family is going to be there when you come home, the fear of not being able to, just see your family, and that security, that you should be able to have, that your family or your friends are always going to be there.
Well, talk to me a little bit about the sort of the family situation in terms of the separation that many families go through when they are not living in the States legally.
Yeah, and so it's very easy now, especially with the Secure Communities program, to separate families. And so people can be arrested for things such as driving without a license, as undocumented immigrants can't obtain driver's licenses everywhere. And so just not being able to do that is a huge part of it, because they can be going home, they can be going to work, and it's a fear of not being able to see your parents. And you can imagine, young kids, they could be citizens or not, and not being able to be sure that they're going to see their family or their parents again, because maybe there was a raid at work, or maybe they just did a minor offense like jaywalking or riding a bicycle on the wrong side of the street. And so I think that it's very easy to get detained and to be deported, that causes a huge amount of stress on our families. and no one is really talking about that.
So now that, the president is talking about proposals to try and fix this problem, members of Congress are talking about it. You've heard some of the plans. Do you think this is going to solve some of those problems you've outlined?
You know what? I think this is very problematic, actually. One, and just thinking about how the process has been for those proposals, I think bringing people, Republicans, Democrats, I think it doesn't make sense. I think that this is not a negotiation. These are human rights. Human rights are not negotiated. Human rights are human rights. And so what we need to do is first things first is have a moratorium on these deportations, because thousands of families have been separated, and children have been left alone away from their parents. In the past 4 years since Obama got elected, there's been 1.5 million deportations. That's 1.5 million families that have been impacted and separated and destroyed. And I think so. I don't think it should be a negotiation. And then, exactly what we've seen is that they're proposing more militarization of the border, tougher enforcement, and so the people that do get to legalize, they'll be okay. But for the other population of immigrants that don't qualify or have a criminal record, they get thrown under the bus. And I think that's very, very risky for our communities because of the existing criminalization and racial profiling of especially Latino communities.
Well, to discuss this, I am joined in the studio by Ryan Grimm, Washington bureau chief for the Huffington Post from Berkeley, California. Roberto Lovato, he is co-founder of Presente.org, an online Latino advocacy organization. And from Newton, Massachusetts, Michael Graham is a conservative political commentator and talk show host. So, Roberto, I'd like to start with you. Congress is starting to sound really serious about immigration reform. What do you think? Is this talk, or is this something that we're going to see finally become law?
Well, I'd love to have that crystal ball on my bald head, but unfortunately I don't. I have mixed emotions like a lot of Latinos, a lot of Presente.org's 300,000 members. We are very enthusiastic about the results of and the responses to the powerful Latino response to the elections. The role they played in getting President Obama elected, and now the expectations that have been built up. On the other hand, I've been an immigrant rights advocate for more than 25 years, and I've been through probably about half a dozen comprehensive immigration reform discussions that have promised to deliver legalization for people that we should be thanking and not talking about them as if they're criminals. So people like Jonathan, and I guess the last thing I'll say is that President Obama is doing well, I think, to unlink legalizing people from this whole call for even more unnecessary security and enforcement, which we have enough of, as you could hear from Jonathan, who rightly says that the people that President Obama called quote-unquote criminals in that speech are people that are jaywalking, people that are driving without a license, pregnant women who have a broken taillight. These are the quote-unquote criminals. And so we really have to invert the discussion. And some of us really have a lot of questions about whether comprehensive immigration reform will do that or whether it'll fail like it has in the past.
Well, Roberto brings up a good point, and he's right. Congress has been here many times before. In fact, it's been, not since President Reagan was there significant overhauling of America's immigration system.
Right, and the problem here for immigration reform is that the incentives don't perfectly line up for it to happen. When Reagan was able to get it done with a Democratic Congress, the incentives were all kind of there for it to benefit everybody in a political sense. We're talking about the political actors themselves, not the people outside. But Democrats are in a win-win situation here. If they get immigration reform through, then President Obama has delivered on his promise to do comprehensive reform, and he gets a win. If they don't get it through, they will blame a nativist element within the Republican Party, and that will be a win for them. So Democrats win either way, and Republicans lose both ways. Now, they get a slight win in this, if immigration reform goes through and that they can take some of the taint off, but it will be a bigger win for Obama. So the problem that you have here is this basic one, that Republicans don't have a huge incentive to go along and give Obama a win, and Democrats do have an incentive to deliver a loss to Republicans.
Well, let's look at some of the specifics of the plan, because we've certainly talked the politics, and yet at the crux of it is the 11 million in the United States without any path to citizenship. Let's take a look at what's been proposed so far. Now, the plan has the backing of 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, including Democrat Chuck Schumer, and also Republicans Marco Rubio and John McCain. Now, it emphasizes 4 key aspects: security along the United States southern border, employer compliance with immigration laws, and provisions for farm workers and highly educated engineers, as well as a pathway to citizenship. But senators insist it does not amount to a path to amnesty. Now, undocumented U.S. residents who want to continue working have to register with the government and pay a fine. This effectively forces them to the back of the line while they apply for permanent status. But while they're waiting, they can work legally and don't have to fear deportation as long as they steer clear of criminal activity. Michael, want to bring you in here. I mean, what do you think when you hear some of these proposals, and what is the reaction going to be from the ordinary Americans?
Well, ordinary Americans have shown in poll after poll that, number one, they don't want to hurt people. They feel sorry for kids of families who have come here illegally. But at the same time, they don't want to reward illegal behavior, people who chose to cheat. And just listen to what you said. Let's imagine there are 2 people in Ireland. And here in Boston, we have quite a few illegal immigrants from Ireland. One chose to come over here 10 years ago illegally. The other one said, no, I'm going to stay. I'm going to wait my turn. I'm going to fill out the paperwork. Well, guess what happened? The guy who stood in line is still in line. The guy who came over illegally stole a job from an American for 10 years, got to live in America, enjoy our prosperity for 10 years, and now gets to stay under Obama's proposal, or under the Senate proposal, in America while he waits. Well, what's he waiting for? He's waiting for what he has that the guy who waited his turn actually got. And the key that people like myself who know where we're going with this, which is 1987 all over again, there'll be amnesty and then there'll be a need for another amnesty a few years later, is that people like the guest you had earlier who said that it is a human right to choose to come to America if you want. You have a human right. So I'm not allowed to have a border. People like Roberto, who are never going to support workplace enforcement, we know that there's never going to be enforcement. No matter how much they talk about enforcement, what we're going to have is what we have today, which is virtually no enforcement.
Well, Roberto, I want to get you to be able to respond to some of that. You know, that is certainly an argument that is going to be heard over and over on Capitol Hill by many members of Congress, particularly those who lean further right, that this is going to be a reward for those who broke the law and entered the United States illegally.
Yeah, I don't know if people actually read the laws or actually study the history of immigration, especially contemporary history and immigration, but there's a study just produced by a scholar at the University of California at Merced that showed that President Obama has deported more people, families, children, than all presidents of the United States from George Washington up to Bill Clinton in 1996. Not than each one of them, but than all of them combined. The enforcement focus of what they call the trade-off on immigration reform, legalization in exchange for increased enforcement and border security that we actually don't even need, is a farce. The debate as defined in Washington is very narrow. But if you move out of Washington, those of us that actually read the laws and have followed the history know, for example, that in terms of border security, the FBI has produced consistent reports at the border, about crime at the border, showing that there are, quote, historic levels of low crime at the border.
Well,
so why are we talking about why are we talking about border security when the border is largely secured according to the primary people responsible for that, the FBI?
Well,
you can point out to a specific incident, but not in fact with the FBI.
Well, the security argument is certainly one that's brought up. In fact, it was brought up by Marco Rubio on Capitol Hill on Monday. Let's take a listen to this soundbite when he was talking about his immigrant background and some of the concerns that many Americans have on this issue.
I live surrounded by immigrants. My neighbors are immigrants. My family's immigrants, married into a family of immigrants. I see immigration every single day. I see the good of immigration. I see how important it is for our future. And as most Americans, I recognize how critical an immigration system that works has been for our heritage as it is for our history, for our future. By the same token, I see the negative that illegal immigration has been for our country and the problems that it causes. And the reality of it is these are issues that the vast majority of Americans agree with as well. The vast majority of Americans believe that we need to have a legal immigration system that works.
Ryan, I'll get you to respond to that because Marco Rubio is a very prominent member of the Republican Party. He's been put forward as a potential presidential candidate, but he's also got a heritage. His parents are immigrants. So this is really key, isn't it, in trying to sell this to the American people, the fact that he is conveying the message. But do you think it's one that's going to work?
Well, there's a deep irony that Marco Rubio would be the one to bring this message because if the situation that prevailed to allow his family to come to the United States prevailed for everyone across the globe, then then we'd be in a situation where you have a human right to come to the United States. He's Cuban.
Yeah.
We have a policy with Cuba that if Cubans get here, however they get here, they can stay here for good. No questions asked. Doesn't matter why they came here. They can come. So if we had that policy for every country, then we'd be having a completely different debate. So to listen to him say that he supports legal immigration like his family did and that his neighbors did, his Cuban neighbors down in Miami, but he doesn't support illegal immigration, it doesn't really make any sense. What's he talking about? So should everyone?
But Ryan,
Sure.
Ryan, you and Roberto do understand that the vast majority of Americans would never support the policy that immigration and amnesty advocates want, which is for the rest of the world to be treated like Cuba. The notion that America should be the one country in the world that is not allowed to have a policeable border, that anyone who wants to come here, as soon as they arrive, they instantly have the same fundamental rights as citizens. If Americans understood that President Obama's allies want precisely that, they would never support what he's trying to do.
Well, I mean, that was the immigration policy that made this country what it is now. But
Okay.
like most countries, we like
Do you
to lift
agree,
the
though, that
drawbridge.
Americans don't want it?
I'm sure they don't, but right, because they're in and they want the drawbridge up. Yeah.
And Roberto, let you respond to this too.
Yeah, our organization launched a campaign called No Somos Rubios. We're not Marco Rubios, basically. Because Marco Rubio had a record of, before he became a senator, he was a state legislator who supported immigration reform, the DREAM Act, and other things. And then he changed his mind when he wanted the Tea Party votes of the right wing. And so he started being the most anti-immigrant guy. We launched our campaign, and now he changed his tune again. And this is kind of the tune in Washington, like John McCain. What happened to John McCain, who said he was opposed to comprehensive immigration reform? That John McCain has disappeared after the elections and the powerful
I got to play the soundbite
Latino
for you,
response.
gentlemen, because John McCain, is not even apologizing for the motivation for this. In fact, he touched on it in a press conference when asked by reporters. Let's listen to his reasoning here when he was asked why Republicans believe immigration reform is critically important right now.
Elections. The Republican Party is losing the support of our Hispanic citizens. And we realize that there are many issues in which we think we are in agreement with our Hispanic citizens, but this is a preeminent issue with those citizens. Also, I think over the years, Republicans in particular, but also Democrats and all of our citizens, have realized the reality of what all of my colleagues just stated. We cannot continue as a nation with 11 million people residing in the shadows.
Roberto, I want to get you to respond to what John McCain had to say since you brought him up. I mean, he's not apologizing there for the fact that the real reason this is a focus right now is because the Republican Party wants to attract Hispanic voters because it did so badly in the presidential elections. I mean, how are Latinos in the United States responding to that?
Well, Latinos are practical people, just like all these politicians in Washington are, who are practical. The thing about Latinos voters right now, we have a diverse voice in our community. There's no one voice, but a majority of us support legalization. There's no polls that I know of that show Latinos supporting more heavy enforcement that separates families, more border security that paints an image of the border as if it's some Wild West, when in fact there are a lot of law-abiding, mostly good people at the border. And most Latinos know that John McCain switched his positions. Marco Rubio switches his positions. And even President Obama has a credibility problem as far as being the standard bearer for immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform, while at the same time deporting one person per minute. So there were like 20 to 30 people deported on Mr. Obama's watch while he was making his speech. Latinos know this because it's our families by an overwhelming majority that are being deported. It's our friends, it's our community, along with other communities that are being heavily impacted by this.
So this doesn't seem to bode
everybody
well.
in D.C. has a credibility problem on this.
Ryan, do you want to jump in? This doesn't sound like it bodes well, given the fact that there is a recognition of all of the flip-flopping that's taking place on the part of politicians.
Right, and and they also have gun legislation to handle, and the Congress is known for not being able to handle a lot of different things at once. And like I was saying earlier, that they all have a credibility problem, and the incentives might not line up to get this done. Everybody needs to say that they're for it. So we're gonna have at least several weeks of everybody being for it and everybody pulling together. And it was funny to see the Gang of Eight jump out ahead of the president in announcing their proposal, and they explicitly told reporters we're doing this to kind of preempt the president. Then the president has his campaign-type speech, and now they're already jockeying for position. John McCain today said that, well, actually, Jeff Flake, my fellow Arizona senator, he's not part of this Gang of Eight. And Mike Lee, he was never really part of it. So actually now it's a Gang of Six. And so, so maybe that's the whittling away that we're already starting to see. But for the next couple of weeks, you're going to see people earnestly pushing for it at least.
And Michael, as Ryan pointed out, people are jockeying and taking positions. There is even a quote coming out of the Speaker Boehner's office that says, that we hope the president is careful not to drag the debate to the left and ultimately disrupt the difficult work that is ahead in the House and Senate. Sounds a little ominous. I mean, how much of a challenge will it be to get this through the House of Representatives, especially given the fact that there are so many sort of further right members in that House?
Well, remember, the American people don't want amnesty. They don't want to reward people who cheated. They want to welcome legal immigrants and reward the legal immigrants for doing it the right way. But as far as of course, it's shameless politics. By the way, I have to apologize, Roberto. I've been anti-McCain for a decade. I've never heard him ever say anything but open borders and amnesty, ever. I don't remember when he was against amnesty. But the fact that he's cravenly saying this is race-based, ethnic... I'm saying that when he ran for president, he was open borders and amnesty. Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why so many of us in the Republican Party opposed him in the primaries. But my point is, this is craven, race-based, ethnic identity politics. It is shameful to watch people say, I don't care about the rule of law. I don't care about treating people fairly. I don't care about the fact that if you were doing what the gentleman we heard from earlier was doing in any other country, he would have been deported already. I care about nothing about that. What do I have to do to get people to cast ballots based on race? Whatever that is, Republican leaders are saying, we'll do it. And it's embarrassing and it's shameful.
Well,
very quickly.
Just one word in praise of cravenness. If it weren't for cravenness, we never would have gotten the Civil Rights Act. So politics can be a good thing,
there was justice behind that.
I'll give the final word to Roberto. Roberto, I guess I want to ask you then, do you think there is an understanding in Washington, whether it be at the White House or on Capitol Hill, that this is far more complex than just attracting the Hispanic vote?
There's an understanding that it's far more complex than, yes, absolutely, but the understanding leads them to make it so simplistic a debate that the devil, the goblins, the Frankenstein monsters inside of the comprehensive immigration reform bill, which will exclude up to millions of people that could qualify for citizenship. If you read the laws, I encourage people to read the laws. And last thing is, what more race-based politic than ignoring Latinos and taking Latinos for granted for the life of Latinos in the United States until 2012 and 2013. A more race-based, and I would say racist, position does not exist.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to leave it there. We appreciate all of your perspectives, all angles and sides of this debate. Thank you for joining us here. And that is all from the team here in Washington, D.C. for now. Now, I want to remind you, don't forget to follow us on Twitter as well as Facebook. That is where you can find more information about our program. And as always, we do want to hear from you. We want to hear what stories you think we should be covering. We want you to send your ideas directly to us here at InsideStory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching Inside Story Americas.